A range of different questions arise from that. I guess we could characterise that as David's living the dream and Sue's the rest of us. David, thinking about the technologies at the smart farm and the potential for them to actually become more mainstream commercial applications, how much of a limitation do you think the sort of stuff Sue's talked about is? Could we pick your Kirby farm up and drop it out at Dubbo or drop it down at Wagga or somewhere like that? Let's not talk about west of Broken Hill or north of Alice Springs, but to what extent do you think that technology possibility is limited by the sort of infrastructure that we've got around telecommunications in some of those even regional areas rather than remote areas?
There's certainly ways around the external telecommunications limitations that we face. I mean, farmers can invest more in on-farm or in-farm telecommunications, telemetry networks and so forth. In other words, it's not a case of, this won't ever go ahead, but it's a case of who should assume the risk, the material and the financial risks about getting it to work. So yes, many of the technologies that we showcase, if you like, could be run using a reasonably configured telemetry system and just one point of connect to the outside world, so that we can get everything up onto the servers and the cloud can come to bear and so forth. So, but again, it's a case of, well, is that a burden that should be a part of the day-to-day farming, just like fencing and maintaining fences and water points and so forth, or is it something that should be taken in terms of a much bigger view? So there are ways around it, and a lot of the technology can be put to work now, but it will cost farmers more, and they will have the material and financial risks.
And the critical point you seem to make there, and I know the people involved in the observant type technology make the same point, that you do need that one point of connection, and even that can be a problem to some locations and participants.
Yeah, look, for sure. I mean, the Kimberley example that I gave with the with monitoring the livestock, they're facing the option on that farm, which is the size of the ACT, of either putting up 2 mobile towers themselves, or hoping a mine goes in, or setting up probably $250,000 worth of telemetry infrastructure to be able to get to look at a creek that if they can't cross after spending an hour and a half in the car, they have to turn around and replan the day. So, it all boils down to just getting the right technology in the right spot. And there are solutions, but it is a limitation. Even that one point of connection is hard, because we gave a demonstration of that technology on that farm and the internet was in and out. And this is supposed to be the farm that we've done all the work to give them the tool. They wanted an internet-ready tool, but even in the demonstration they had trouble accessing it, and then, even though they'd invested in it.
So Sue, given that, are you optimistic, pessimistic?
Absolutely optimistic. Someone's going to listen someday, because, and let's face it, you take smart farms like ours, which it's a taunt. Our farm's no smarter than any other farm, we're just connected. If we can get enough people pissed off about it, what they haven't got, opportunities like discipline, you can generally observe it in its absence rather than there. And so, again, it's about the message, and someone will listen eventually, and we've got these regional reviews that are now a regular thing. But at the end of the day, someone smart in this country or allied to an international technology provider will find a solution that'll work. So I'm very optimistic.
Sue?
Look, I'm optimistic too. I think the reality is that the long-term satellite is going to be far better than the interim. I think our concern as a panel was that if we don't manage it right from the start, that we will end up in the same situation we have with the interim. Now, NBN say they'll just put up another satellite, but I think we've really got to be thinking about who that satellite needs to be for, to be, in terms of use. I think the other thing is we are probably seeing, and of course when we started this review, in fact when we provided the report, we provided it to Minister Turnbull, who was the Minister for Communications. So we've actually got a Prime Minister who is tech savvy, who understands that this is the way that we need to be, everyone needs to be able to operate. And therefore this isn't a luxury, this is a must-have for everyone, and I think that that's why we do need to be optimistic. And if we're pessimistic, we're not going to have the wherewithal to make it work.
Peter Thompson, probably to David, the issue of people with the skills to repair, diagnose and maintain digital infrastructure, and that could be as simple as a computer in your tractor or the technology behind the smart farm, is what we're seeing as a huge limitation at the moment. So that's one question. The other is, maybe Sue, I'm not sure whether you came across this in the review, but utilising, and it refers to the area that Nick was talking about before, the more regional areas where we're all on the RCS system, HCRC, those towers, that there's a lot of physical infrastructure there that I believe could be utilised to spread mobile technology. Where's that heading? So 2 questions there.
If you like, I'll do the first. So let's face it, and we have this all the time. If a harvester's driving an Auto-steer tractor and it misbehaves, the first thing they want to do is ring someone for some advice on how to fix it. And if they're out of the mobile reception, well, they're screwed. The alternative is you have some sort of telemetrics system running live into your tractor, provided you've invested in the on-farm telemetrics capability. Lots of nods around the thing. We've all been there. And at the end of the day, you're right. Even these smart things, if they break down or they misbehave, it's all boils down to a simple set of connection points. And if they don't have it, they struggle. They run back to the farmhouse and they've lost a couple of hours of work while they work it out and then go back and pick up where they left off. So you're right. So it all keeps coming back, no matter what we do, no matter how we look at it, we keep getting back to that same problem, is that cows and tractors don't operate on road and transportation corridors or in the vicinity of many mines, at the moment anyway. Well, you're right. So, some of it can be troubleshot remotely, and so you can get help on the phone. So there are people to repair. Otherwise, it's that same old sink of, or the biggest overhead of your business, which is time on the road to go out and fix it. But for example, we did some demonstrator work with just cameras on the head of a farmer who had a problem with a tractor. Good mobile connection, run a little camera system. They had the head under the bonnet, and the guy was back at Peel Valley Machinery in Tamworth looking at it and providing advice, and the right part was in the mail the next day. But again, that was aided and abetted by that connection. So sure, we could do with more in the workforce like that, but there is a resource there if you can connect to them.
I think the answer to the second part of the question is it was part of a very clear recommendation from us, and that was that you've got to be able to use existing infrastructure and see how you can leverage off that to be able to get that mobile connectivity, because that is vital. Going back to the first part of the question, I mean, I'd love to think that if we can get out the message that those are the sort of skills we're going to need, and that you can be in agriculture and have technical skills that can be utilised. I'd like to think that will bring young people back into agriculture, because it's changing. Instead of being in the paddock, they're actually driving the computer to be able to get the outcomes that are just increasing productivity. So I think that we hear STEM and we hear that being talked about by organisations like Google, but I think it's just as relevant for the ag sector.
Okay, how are we going for questions? We're just about... Yes, we've got one over here.
Yeah, Alistair Davidson from ABARES. Probably a question for David. Just wondering if we're getting a sense of the extent to which these new technologies are able to improve productivity or profitability.
Good question. I can always retreat to the safe academic ground of, well, I'm working a little farther afield and a bit more blue sky. But we always get the question. The reality is, if you can, we know that if we can, with the sensor networks of soil moisture, for example, there is evidence out there that you can double your production double the bales of cotton per megalitre of water used. We know that we can reduce our fertiliser input by 30% if we can just manage that against our water resource in a rain-fed cropping system. We know that GPS guidance systems will pay themselves off in 3 years in reduced overlap of herbicide and so forth. So I guess that there's quite a heritage related to the precision agriculture R&D that has created the dollar value arguments for it. The Southern Precision Ag Association publishes their annual or their PA in practice book, which comes out every couple of years. It's into its 3rd edition, I believe, and every page of it has got a ka-ching sign on it with a case study about what it meant to that grower, what it saved. The evidence is there. What we're finding is, of course, the key limitations are around either accessibility to the technology from a connected point of view, confidence in using the technology, hence access to the support networks, or the lack of some of this ubiquitous type infrastructure that we talked about earlier. So, Alistair, I think the evidence is there, and if we all sat around and just gathered it all together, because really smart farming is no more than precision agriculture and STEM in action. It's just now we have a context in which we can bring all that R&D to bear in living and breathing real situations. So the information is around, Alistair, heaps of it.
And I think, Alistair, the other thing that there is there's the current round of R&D for profit through DAF in terms of funding. And I think that the sort of projects that can be done that can be looking at how you can actually utilise telecommunications to get greater take-up, and what are some of those innovative ways that we could look to get this brought out far more widely is something that I think the RDCs could look at in terms of future projects under that program. I can say that now, I'm not on the assessment panel.
And certainly it was interesting, and again, reflecting on the US example, where the long-term studies of the average gains from precision agriculture in the Corn Belt were certainly in the region of 10 to 15% productivity growth. And a lot of that, about half that was saving on inputs, and half that was increased yield by switching from field average to square metre average, rather than sort of, that rough average that had been used in the past. So certainly the evidence is there, but I think the other point is that the learning is the bit that just collecting data becomes a useless pile of information unless you can actually turn that into an actionable outcome. Yeah. And there's a sort of a chicken and egg situation where the data drives the learning, which then drives the usefulness of the data, and I think that's one of the interesting challenges we face here.